And while I'm waiting for the technology, I am going to be talking about very practical skill-based today, and in fact not talking about gender, which I hate not talking about gender. So in fact I can't cope with it. People who are in the audience who know me and have been to talks of mine know I just love talking about this. My 20-year-old son is sick of it. But I will take 1 minute and talk about gender, and I'll do something I did yesterday as well, which is talk about numbers. This time I have 5 numbers. The first of them is 3. I am conscious that our wonderful James Lush, new man extraordinaire, who was our 1%, has had the numbers tripled this morning, and we have 3 men here today. New men, brave men. Thank you very much for being here with us. And I want to say that because my second number is 30. About 30 years ago, this was the percentage of women in boards. And I want you to think, as the women who are in the majority, what does it feel like? As the men, what does it feel like? Because it's kind of an interesting reflection, I think, of what it was like 30 years ago. 13 years ago, so that's my third number, the numbers were 6%, so double this. It's my 4th number. And now it's 12, my 5th number. So 4 times this number is what it is today. And it just to give us a feel for what it's like for men and women in those situations. I think in general, if you're in the majority, you don't think terribly much about it. But if you're in the minority, you're very aware of how small the numbers are. So there are my numbers and my gender talk, and I promise I will not talk about gender except one time in this talk. So I'm going to talk about strategic influencing, or as it's often known as well, political savvy. This is a topic which, in my work with senior leaders, and frankly with CEOs in particular, it's the primary work that I do. If I had to teach only one thing to senior leaders, this is the one thing I would teach. So I think it's an important topic. It's really about how to influence people in a strategic way. And I'm going to talk through some of the theory of it. All of the slides except this one are from a guy called Joel DeLuca. Joel DeLuca was an American guy who did 20 years of research on this topic and certified me to teach the topic. But as an American working over here for 30 years, I'm conscious that a lot of things that were made in America are not necessarily 100% welcomed in other parts of the world. So this Baddeley and James model is in fact a British model which came out in '87. And I love this model because it actually, it's a very intuitive model. You look at those animals and you think, ooh, I know somebody who's like that. So there's 2 axes here. One is the kind of north-south axis, which is about levels of political awareness. The ones on the top are highly aware of the politics in an organization. The ones on the bottom, low awareness. And on the right-hand side, you have people who are acting with high integrity. The ones on the left acting with low integrity, comfortable with psychological game playing in the worst sense of that phrase. So I want to just sort of stop and say, when you look at those animals, do you kind of see people, you kind of think to yourself, oh, I know somebody who would slot right into that little box over there? Yes, I have some nods around the table. Why don't I take a minute or two and just talk it through so you can kind of get the feel for it. So the fox, let's start with the fox because that's quite an obvious one. This is where the gang are highly aware and they are willing to be quite backstabbing. They're willing to lie to people to be able to get what they want in a situation. The gang on the right, on the top, the wise owls, are the kind of Nelson Mandelas of the world, the Gandhis of the world, the people who are actually very aware of what's happening, but they're going to maintain a high integrity in the way that they engage in politics. Oftentimes people, when they first come into the workforce, are on the bottom. They have, in particular, the innocent lamb. They come out of schooling where you've come from a meritocracy, where you do your own exam papers and then you move up, or you write a good essay and you move up. They believe that the workforce is going to be like that. There are some students in the audience. It's not. You've been hearing about that for 2 days, so I won't go into that anymore. But essentially what happens is that over time you kind of move up the awareness scale, but generally speaking, you come into, by the time you're in the workforce, you've got a pretty good feel for your own sense of ethics, your own sense of values, and how you want to behave. So in general, you will stay on the right or the left, depending upon where you've started, with sometimes forays into the other side, and I should say the dark side, really, shouldn't I? Oftentimes, if you have, I work in the investment banking world as a consultant oftentimes, and I know we have some people in the audience who've come from that universe. Many times people in that world will say to me, I have mostly foxes in the senior leadership. And as a result, I started out as a lamb, but I tried to be like that because I thought it was the only way I could be successful. So they try, but they, of course, are quite inept in the way that they do that because it's not natural to them. And then usually they kind of head back over and then head up toward the wise owl. Usually when I teach this, most people who are foxes don't actually admit to being foxes. Some do. If they have lots and lots of senior leaders in their part of the business that are foxes, they think it's perfectly fine to be a fox, and then they will actually admit that. But most of the time we get them saying either that they're inept donkeys or that they're owls. So just a kind of quick overview of the field. Joel did this massive piece of research with 11,000 subjects over a 20-year period, a longitudinal study, and what he found indeed was that the vast majority of people, 65 to 80% of people that he interviewed across 9 multinational organizations, don't engage in politics. They don't engage. So the folks on the right, whom he called the pragmatists, are the ones who are engaging, and his savvy 5%, the politically savvy, overlay on top of the owls, so they're ethical in the way that they're actually engaging in politics. The mocks are the Machiavellians, who are essentially like the foxes, 15%. So you're looking at a total of 20% of the population actually engaging in politics at all, and the rest on the left are basically avoiding it. And so the ones on the right have higher impact on the organizations and their careers move faster. The ones on the left, lower impact, and their careers move slower. And in this, he found a kind of, in the left-hand side, he found a kind of 3 subcategories. So he found the youngest group was actually waiting for clarity. Their view was, if only the people above me had told me this, then I could have got my presentation funded. I could have got that project funded. The gang on the left-hand side over here are the work harder, and a lot of women fall into this category. So you don't get the promotion, you think you didn't work hard enough. So they come in on Saturdays, they work from home, they do this, that, and the other thing, but basically they think that if by working hard but not engaging in politics, they will actually move up the ladder. A small proportion of those over a number of years migrate into the cynic category. The cynics are the ones who are the oldest of the population that he interviewed, and they are the ones who have the lowest job satisfaction. They have the most hobbies outside of work. So for them, the work day is actually awaiting to start their real life at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock when work is finished. But basically, not a desperately happy population over here on the left-hand side. Okay. What are the things that are blocking the folks on the left-hand side from moving over to the right and engaging in politics? He found 2 things. The first is a rational block, and Joel was a scientist by nature himself. He was literally a rocket scientist who was working in the U.S. Air Force in the R&D department, and he and his science friends actually were putting ideas up to the general for funding. And what they were finding was that consistently they were coming back with a no. You can't get this funded. And these guys were quite brilliant scientists, so they were thinking, what is wrong with this picture? Why? And this is where Joel actually got his first interest in the politics. And he did a research study, and what he found was that the generals at the top of the tree had just come out of big field roles, and they were actually in a kind of hover position in the head of R&D while they were waiting for the next big field role to come up. So they were being asked by these scientists to make very long-term, big spend decisions, and they weren't going to be around when those came to fruition. So of course for them it was a no-brainer. They were going to say no. So once he kind of got that, he thought, okay, so the system isn't acting rationally. He then went off to do a second PhD in organization behavior at Yale, and then did this 20-year research project. So the rationalists believe that that organizations are rational entities, and they happen to have human beings working in them. And basically, the gang on the right-hand side are human systems oriented, as he calls them. They understand that actually in organizations, you've got lots of human networks of trust that are not mapped. So you might have people who went to school together. You might have people who actually are in the same family. You might have people who are from the same religious community, or just hang out together, friends. And those are the ones that are actually the kind of trust links, the networks. And those are the ones, therefore, that you can influence through. So the gang on the right know that, but the gang on the left think, well, the quality of my idea should be good enough, and the merit of my work should be good enough to get me this passed, get the project funded, to promote me. But actually, they're not using the human systems to influence. The other block that Joel found was that there's a moral block. There's a sense of, if you, for example, look over that wall from the left to the right, and what you see is mostly the mocks, mostly the foxes, you think the only way I can be active in politics is by compromising my values. So I'm not going there. I'm not going there, and no matter what you do, I'm not gonna change. And I sometimes am in situations where I have people sent to me for teaching on this, and they've been forced to come by their bosses, and they will sit with arms folded, and they will sit with their hands covering their mouths because they don't want me to change their morality. And you know, they're going to sit in there because they have to be there, but I'm not going to change their morality. So I am not here to change your morality, but rather to recognize that there is another way. There is the savvy way. There's the owl way. So you can engage in politics and remain true to yourself. And of course, when you take those blocks away, you have then choice about whether to behave in a savvy way or in a Machiavellian way. Joel's definition was ethically building a critical mass of support for an idea you care about. So this is something within the business context, which often people think, oh, well, this is about the company that I'm working in. Absolutely, you can use it in there. But what I'm finding more and more is that people who are front-facing, who are looking out to the clients, are thinking, you know, we've got a toehold already in this client base, but how could we expand our footprint in this organization? Well, thinking through the political links, the kind of human dynamics, that shows you where you can start to influence. So you can use it externally as well. And in addition to that, you can use it in your personal life. In fact, last week I was teaching this course, and I came across a woman who told us that when she was a teen, she was the fourth of 4 girls. So in her teens, when she was about 15, she wanted to go off to a rock concert. And her sisters had only been allowed when they were 17. But she engaged her sisters to work on the parents so that she could go when she was 15. So there's a kind of, you know, a kind of happy situation in where you could be using this. Another less happy one, if you have a relative in the NHS and they're not getting the care that you think they should be getting, you might want to be thinking about influencing the people who are the right kind of people to be near them and to start attending to them. So it's something that you can use literally in any part of your life. So the 7 strategy tools and tactics, and this is a kind of very condensed version, as you can imagine, of a half-day course. So this is the Quickie Deluxe version. Basically, in this process, Joel found that the politically savvy told him that you have to be informal in the way that you influence, because you have the highest chances of success in an informal setting. But you actually have to be systematic. You have to put together a strategy and then work it through. So you have to be systematic but informal. They have something called the 51% guide that Joel was able to extract from the politically savvy, and that is, if you have a radical, new, or controversial idea that you want to try to get passed, you have to make sure that 51% of the people who are in decision-making positions understand the idea before you go into a decision-making meeting and are willing to explore it further. Okay, so you have to, and I'll give you an example of a place where that didn't happen. Apparently, the computer mouse, so this thing that I have here on the desk, was invented at Xerox by Xerox engineers in Connecticut. in California. And these guys were amazed. They thought this has got fantastic market possibilities. And they flew over to Stamford, Connecticut to the board, where Xerox's board sits. And at the time, Xerox was primarily a copier company. So they went to the board without doing any pre-influencing and said, we've got this fabulous idea, it's got huge market potential. And basically the people in the board were like, why, what does this mean? Why would anybody want a mouse on their desk? It just is what a weird idea. So they basically said no immediately. And the concept was sold to Steve Jobs very soon after that for a song. Who then, of course, took it into the marketplace. So there's kind of very practical things that go wrong if you don't actually think about who are the decision makers, do they understand this radical idea, and are they willing to explore it further in the group meeting. The third thing is agenda linking, and this is going to be obvious to some people, but less obvious to others. If you're trying to convince people of something and influence them, it's really important to understand what their agenda is and how this is going to help their agenda. So you have to kind of know the agendas of the people you're trying to influence and then work out how you can align yours with theirs. Simple concept, sometimes hard to put into real life. Credibility path. This is really about understanding who trusts whom and basically using those links of trust to do the influencing through. So for example, if I were in a situation where I had a good relationship with Janet, but I didn't have a good relationship with you, but Janet did, and I needed to convince you of something, it's going to be much smarter for me to ask Janet, if she's going to be involved, to actually have a word with you.
That's always the case.
Yeah. So yes. But it's kind of, sometimes it goes against our sense of intuition, or some people kind of say, well, it's my responsibility to have that conversation with you. I shouldn't delegate it to somebody else. She's a busy woman after all. But actually, the chances of my convincing you, if I don't have a trust relationship, are much, much lower. And indeed, if we have a hostile relationship, they're significantly lower. It's a very high-risk conversation to have. So part of what the politically savvy do is they evaluate the risks in the conversations and choose the lower risks options. You do need a level of interpersonal diplomacy to be successful in this, but you don't have to be a UN diplomat. These are the kinds of skills of influencing you would expect a kind of mid-manager to have, really. The use of group meetings in large corporates and in, frankly, most organizations. Group meetings are the way decisions are taken. So what you have to do is to be clear about when those meetings are happening and make sure you've got enough time to do individual influencing before you get to them. And if that means that you have to actually postpone the group meeting or postpone your piece of work being on the agenda, it's better to do that. Your chances are higher of getting something passed if you actually move it to the next month or move it to 2 weeks later. And my personal favorite, the plan-act approach. Because I work with a lot of organizations where they're under lots of time pressure to be accomplishing tasks, they're often in a situation where they think, oh, I have to do some influencing. Who do I need to influence? Oh, Joanna, I've got to go to Joanna. So they don't think about the 5 other people that they need. Now, if I didn't have a good relationship with Joanna, but I acted on that immediately, that could totally wreck my chances for getting this thing supported. So it's about thinking through the full strategic plan and only then taking action. Now, the planning process will take probably 30 minutes, and we're about to go into the tools for that. So these are the tools that Joel basically extracted from the politically savvy. It's asking yourself 5 key questions, and they are, who are the key players? And by that we mean, who are the decision makers or the influencers of those decision makers on this particular issue? How powerful or influential are they in the organization relative to this issue? How much are they currently for or against your idea? How likely are they to change their view? And finally, do those key influencers and decision makers have positive or negative trust relationships with each other? Mapping that out. So it's essentially taking that data and putting it into this template. And I should probably just say, Janet, I think I should probably just leave this with you so you can kind of disseminate this so people have the tools So essentially what you see is the stakeholders on the left, how influential on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being high, how for or against on a scale of -10, most against, 0 being neutral, +10 being most for, how changeable they are, low, maybe high, and then high trust, low trust. And then you get them to map it into this. Now this is where the rubber hits the road. When you have this graphic done, you can see very quickly how tough or easy the task is going to be. Because usually, you as the individual stakeholder are going to be mostly for whatever it is that you're trying to get pushed. But what you want to see is, A, how influential are you relative to the other people? Are you on the top half or the bottom half? If you kind of look at the other most influential people, what box are they, on the left or the right? If they're in the right, it's going to be a much easier process. If you are in the top right side, in other words, you're influential, it's going to be a much easier process than if you're on the bottom, or if they're way over to the left. And then we have a template for outlining the agendas of the different individuals, so you can kind of align them. Look at the business rationale if it's appropriate to do so, and then plan out who should talk to whom, in what order, about what, and why. And that is the end of my presentation. You can see no gender.